Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is Wednesday morning already. It's crazy how these weeks fly by. October 1st, spooky season, as every YouTube guy that I know that I watch refer to the Halloween season as spooky season. It's kind of funny, but I guess you could say that's a good way to describe it. So yeah, Halloween is coming up. Pretty excited. I love Halloween. Halloween is my favorite holiday. So I typically, well, as far as my habits or how I am, I don't really do anything different to, you know, uh, as far as movies that I watch or like as far as decorations go. My house, for the most part, is kind of decorated and with a Halloween aesthetic year round. And I watch horror movies all year round. I I usually love to do something on Halloween. Sometimes it doesn't always happen, but for the most part, I always do something usually really cool for Halloween. Um, I last year, 2024 was a kind of sucked. I planned this year should be a lot more fun. I actually have a gig on Halloween this year with a band that I used to play with. I used to play in a band called Bone Broth for a few years, and that band was a really fun band, and it was all improvised. It was a funny thing because it was a band that was put together with someone that I used to play with in a previous band, and this person had this idea of putting together this band that was going to be real loose and kind of improvised, but kind of structured at the same time, and it had like you know different elements. Everybody had a real big different kind of a background. So it was interesting. Like we played our first gig at this place in Rockland, Maine called Ada's, and it was pretty much during COVID and pretty much a few months after a lockdown, and it was during the time when music everything was outside. So we played this gig outside, and it was the first time we all got together and we played, and it was with my and we had hung out before. We were pretty good buddies before, and we had jammed a few times, and we were actually in a band. My friend Eric Halsey, aka Halsey, was on bass, and my friend Ronnie Enor, which is a wild kind of thing of how I met him because he has this solo group, Sonic Wallpaper, which is an electronic group, and we've played a lot of shows together with Quantum, and to get in different settings. And then also Halsey has a electronic group as well. And fast forward a few years, we've played a lot of shows together with our electronic groups, and it's been really fun. But at the time when I first saw Ronnie, he was playing every Saturday on Oak Street in Rockland, which was the street at the time during COVID that was closed off, and he would play every Saturday at this restaurant, outside of this restaurant, Cafe Miranda. And it was really cool. Like, I used to go to Oak Street all the time because it was the only place you could go to and more or less, get food and kind of like see music and feel like relatively safe because it was all outside and spread out, and it was an awesome time, and a good thing to be able to do during such a dark period. And I would go there all the time on Saturdays and then sometimes Fridays, and then see music or just go out for ice cream or food with a couple of friends. And I got in this routine, and I was working at the time this nighttime job, so I would get done at like 8:30 or so, and then go over there and hang out with a friend or two. And I did this. I started doing this every weekend. I wasn't playing any gigs or nothing, so it was therapeutic. Um, I was also living at my folks' place because I couldn't handle living by myself at the time. It was a crazy time, but anyway, so we all came together in this for this first gig, and we started playing, and it was all improvised, and it was fun. And then after a period of a few months, the band started getting uh, a lot of gigs, and then we had this idea of trying to start rehearsing, and then we started rehearsing, and which on paper is a good thing. We started rehearsing, and then we started like working on these arrangements for these tunes and blah blah blah. And then I felt, I've talked to the guys after since then, but we started playing another series, a round of gigs, and I felt like the gigs weren't going that great. Like it was weird. Like we were just not really connecting. The dynamics were off. We just weren't. I don't know. It was just not the same. And so I had this idea. Like I proposed this idea that and we rehearsed for a while, and it just got frustrating. And I was like, hey, maybe this kind of particular thing that we're doing, we shouldn't rehearse. Maybe it should be loose and totally in the moment and just improvised. So we ended up pulling the plug on rehearsing, and then we went back to just totally improvising, and the band became even more loose that way. And strangely enough, it seemed to help the band. And we were, I don't know, the band became pretty successful. And then about a year and a half ago, the band out of nowhere kind of broke up, and it was not a very good situation. We were in the midst of recording an album and playing a lot of gigs, and it felt like things were really kind of really revving up for the band. So the band broke up, and then we were in this weird limbo, and I was already playing gigs with Ronnie, mostly in the context of with the electronic group with Quantum, and in his group, and then also with Halsey. We've played quite a few shows together, and so we decided as a trio to keep going. Maybe we'll do some other kind of project. So about it's almost 2 years ago now. Or I should say probably it was probably a year ago. Yeah, it was a year ago. It wasn't 2 years ago. So a year ago, we decided to try playing our first gig as just a trio, and we came up with this name, and the name of the band was Space Junk. And we played a gig. We played our gig at Hey Sailor, and I think that was the only show we ever played as a trio. And it was pretty fun. I mean, we just totally improvised, and it was pretty fun. And then I don't think we did any other gigs since then. Um, yeah, I don't think we did any other gigs. So anyway, fast forward to 2025 or Halloween 2025. We are going to be playing a gig on actual Halloween, which I'm excited at Symington Corner in Rockport, which is a really cool old kind of Grange hall. So we're going to be playing a show there, and we'll see how it goes. And it's going to be like actually on Halloween, and it's going to be like a Halloween party, and so yeah, it'll be fun. Uh, so so look forward to that, and because Halloween is like my favorite holiday. Anyway, I just uploaded. Well, I'm in the midst of uploading a video, and yesterday I uploaded a video on one of the best movies I've seen in recent time, and that is the new Paul Thomas Anderson movie, One Battle After Another. So check out that review. Please check out that movie. That movie is just so damn good. There's been two movies that I've seen this year, very recently, back to back, basically. The Long Walk, the new Stephen King film. It's a Stephen King adaptation. Incredible, incredible film. And then also One Battle After Another. Just both tremendous films and movies that I think are designed and meant to be seen on the big screen. So please check it out. Please check those out. And I just did another show yesterday that is coming coming at you pretty soon. It'll be uploaded on the channel probably today, about kind of the state of the industry. I do these little, like, probably sometimes talk a little too much anyway, but I do these little rant videos where I want to talk about industry things, business things, as far as, when it's related to films, of course, box office, things that are happening, how the Hollywood system, and how kind of complicated things are right now for people to put out films, marketing, trailers, and also with the negative aspects of that, there are a lot of positive aspects, especially due to the digital age. So I do a lot of videos, or I've probably done about 5 or 6 videos where I kind of address those things. And I just did a new video about some new issues that I keep hearing about, in particular about the marketing and the success or the not successful opening for the new Paul Thomas Anderson movie, One Battle After Another, which it was a success. But just the weird place, the weird state that we are in, especially when it comes to people's habits, the way we seek out media and our entertainment. So it's a long video, and I kind of talk all about those things. But anyway, and then today's show is another music show. I love doing music shows. I've been doing a lot. I've also branched out to doing like album reviews, like some recent CDs that I've bought that I really liked. And then throughout the last year or two, I've done quite a few music videos and covered bands that are, done shows on some of my favorite groups and some of my biggest influences, groups like Suicide, WAP Stan, even death metal bands that I really love, black metal bands that I really love. So it's I try to always, Alltecker, which I'm going to see this month and I'm super excited about, Aphex Twin, lots of different things. And all of these things are, all of the music and things are direct. They're all like a direct influence on my band, Quantum, obviously. And music, so films are always the biggest kind of influence on it. But today's show is going to be on a band that I think is a very, very important band. And I was like, you know what? I need to talk about these guys because they're interesting too, because I think that they're very popular, like in this kind of small, well, not a small, but a relatively small niche of people who like electronic music. And they're very popular in this kind of circle or in this particular realm. But then outside of it, people don't know who they are. But I do hear people talk about them. And that is Boards of Canada. Actually this morning, I just started listening to them again. It's been a while. But it's a band that I have spent countless hours listening to, and I have most of their albums, most of their CDs, and they're a Scottish duo, Mike Madison and Marcus Ewan, and they're both brothers, and they are a Scottish duo. They've been around for years, and since 1986. And they are most well known because they've been putting out records, really prolific group. It's been a few years since they put out a new album, but they were a very prolific group, especially in the 2000s and the 90s. And they are, the majority of their records are on Warp Records. Warp Records is one of my favorite record labels. They have some big names to their roster. I mean, Warp Records is probably most well known for all of the Aphex Twin albums. Aphex Twin has been signed to Warp Records for many years. Autechre, my favorite band of all time, has been also part of that label for many years. And I believe the first Thundercat album was on Warp Records. Also, Flying Lotus, which is a another really popular artist who is now a film director, um, and a slew of others. And of course, Boards of Canada. Boards of Canada have been around again since '86, old school to the new school. I mean, and these guys are so highly creative. I went through a stage of where I listened to these guys constantly, and I have most of their albums. And there's probably two or three albums that I have listened to so many times that again I lose count. And I got into these guys. I got introduced to Boards of Canada quite a few years ago. I've been a fan of their music for a very, very long time. I think that for me, they're one of my favorite groups. I think they really invented a genre too. I think they're highly, highly inventive, and I think they created this newer sound that went on to become more popular. But they did it in a very unique way, and I'm going to kind of get into that too. And again, one of my biggest influences as far as music things for my band Quantum. Spent so much time listening to these guys. Highly, highly creative. And I got turned on to them probably about maybe like 13, 15, maybe even longer years ago. I used to. He now lives in Nashville, but there was and I haven't talked with him in quite a while, but I had a friend back then, maybe 15, 20 years ago, that I used to play in a couple of different bands with, and he was really, and his name was Clint Hartswell. He is still doing music. He's doing a lot of like acoustic and bluegrass Americana music, but he is still, I would assume, is still into a lot of experimental music and electronic music. But at that time, we played in a couple of bands together, a couple of projects, and all those things. And he was way into electronic music. And one of the bands he got me into was Boards of Canada. He had said to me, I don't know, like it was. He got me to some really cool music. Another band he got me into that I really love a lot is Jamie Lydell, who's another electronic artist who is just tremendous. And I remember he like made me a mix CD or something, and he's like, "You should check out these guys, Boards of Canada. I think you'd really dig them. They're like one of my favorite electronic groups." And ever since then, I've been a huge fan. And they have a really interesting style because I think their music is very much like the centerpiece or the heart of their music is definitely hip hop. I think they're really influenced by a lot of hip hop. Their stuff is very, it's different than, say, well, rhythmically it's not like when you listen to Aphex Twin. Like, for example, my favorite Aphex Twin album is Drux, and that's a very experimental album. It's a very intense, dark album, more in the lines of drum and bass and jungle, where the grooves and everything are really cut up, and it's really hyper kinetic, really fast, very intense, and kind of abstract at times. And then also another comparison sometimes that I make to kind of how, because of how different stylistically they are, but Autechre, where I think Autechre also is very much uh, influenced by hip hop big time, but they do this very abstract kind of broken, almost jaded sounding rhythmic um, sound where things are very kinetic, but there is this very unconventional, really innovative approach. And I think Boards of Canada has like, I think they have maybe, for people who might not have heard them, I think at face value they might have a little bit of a more of a slightly more commercial appeal, because sometimes rhythmically you can overtly hear the hip hop influence in their music, and they have a lot of beats, if you will. So there's like that, and it's very easy to kind of lock into that, especially if you're the first time listening to their music. But I think also they are incredibly experimental, and they really do incorporate tons of different influences, and I think they also incorporate a lot of, to a degree, non electronic influences. Um, I think they have a really big psychedelic influence. I think they have a rock influence. I would even say, um, well, definitely an ambient quality. I mean, that's a major component of their sound, and maybe even like folk, acoustic, kind of rock based stuff too. Really eclectic sound. And the thing that they have about their sound that I've always been mesmerized by and so fascinated with, a lot of their stuff is really minimalist. And again, it has this very spooky, dark kind of quality. They always use these really cool melodies. Everything that they all of their tunes have this really cool. There's always a really cool melodic component, and I think melody is such a it might even, at least from my perspective, and I've kind of learned this over the years, but I really feel that melody is key. I remember when I first started Quantum, and when this whole thing came, when my mind kind of changed as far as, or my mind opened as far as like how to approach like writing music. But Quantum, my band Quantum, has been around for about 10 years, and or 10 years, which is, every time I think of that, it's like holy shit. But when I first started writing for the band, I was obviously approaching things from like 90% of the time I was approaching things from like a rhythmic idea, being that I play drums, and I would, the way I would kind of compose music back then would be like I'd sit around and dick around with different ideas. I'd set up a drum machine, and like set up a little drum loop, and and sit there and play over it and come up with some new things, try to come up with new things. And I'd spent tons of hours, tons of time just like dicking around with that. And then if I, through that process, I would come up with like a groove or some kind of rhythm that I thought was cool. That would usually be my starting point when I would start the tune or create a tune. And I would focus 100% on the rhythmic side of things. And once I felt the rhythmic was good, and like if I would want to, add some percussion or what have you, then I would start adding, you know, keyboards, and then I would come up with like some melody, and then after I had some kind of semblance of melody, then I would start adding some effects or some other things, and then go from there. And I did that for probably about 3 years, where I that's how I approached music as far as writing music, because it was a very new thing for me, especially in the context of electronic music. And I remember after about 3 years or so of doing that, I hit this really big roadblock, and I suddenly couldn't really come up with any new ideas, and it was really really hard. And I felt like I kept doing the same thing. I wasn't really doing anything new. I wasn't doing anything that was really interesting. And it felt like I hit this brick wall, and I didn't really know where to go from there. And during this time, Mike Whitehead, who plays bass in Quantum and is a really, one of my best friends, and he's been in the band since. He I remember he saw that I was kind of struggling, writing material, and I was kind of, I got to this point when that was happening that I felt like I was forcing things. I was trying to like make this happen and trying to like put this with that, and it wasn't necessarily really gelling, and it wasn't really cohesive, and I was kind of forcing myself, and he could and Mike could see that I was kind of struggling with not really coming up with like new material, with coming up with new material that was good or exciting. And I remember, and Mike comes from a really interesting background. I mean, he plays bass in the band in Quantum, and he uses lots of effects and all these things. But his background is primarily a jazz guy. His main instrument is trumpet, and he's an incredible jazz musician, and so that's his background. And that was one of the reasons I got him on board to do the band, was because I listen to a lot of jazz, and I love jazz deeply, and I wanted to try to have that influence as a thing in our sound as well. And I remember when that was happening with the struggles, he kind of brought this jazz sensibility to a lot of the music, and he really does to this day. I think even more so. But I remember him saying to me, when it comes to like composing music, writing music, he said for him, what he learned the most from his jazz background is that it's, at the end of the day, you have all of these things, all of these different components that make music, or make it interesting, or make it appealing to your ear. But he said at the end of the day, it's a melody. It's about the melody. If you from a compositional standpoint or a writing standpoint, if you have a really good strong melody, and it doesn't have to be, it can be very simple, or it can be very complex, but it doesn't have to be complex to be good. If you have a really good standing melody, then after that, everything should fall in place. And it should be, after you have that, things should come along, and it should be an easier process as far as a songwriter, from a songwriting perspective. And he like really stressed that melody is key. And I remember him saying that he got that whole kind of concept from his jazz background playing trumpet, which the main focus of that is melody. So that really like kind of blew my mind, and after that I started focusing totally on that, and it took me a long time to invest my energy into that new kind of focus. And so after a while, I started approaching writing music where I'm focusing on the melodic aspect first. And if I have a strong melody, then the rhythmic applications and ideas and effects and all these other things are secondary, and they come way after. But if the melody's there, if the melody's not there, it's like building a house, and before you have a good foundation built, you're worried about putting on a nice deck, or you know making the paint, or creating this really painting it in this really cool way. That's all and fine and dandy, but you need to have a really strong structure and base first. Like the foundation has to be strong, and then all of these exterior things come way after the fact. So that's how I started approaching music, and ever since then, I'm like, okay, that makes sense. It's still a lot of tremendous amount of work, but now it's like, okay, melody is key. And I think with Boards of Canada, they are all about melody. And again, some of their stuff is very simplistic, but what they do in those confines is pretty miraculous. They also do this. They also have this very unorthodox style, and a style of how they compose or perform these tunes that I don't really hear a whole lot of other artists do it, more or less. They, all of their songs, like their melodies and a lot of their tunes, have this like slightly where everything feels like it's slightly detuned, where they kind of alter the tuning of the song so everything sounds a little bit more strange, a little weird, a little bit more weird, and and maybe even, well, darker and a little bit more sinister. And I remember, like I said in the beginning of the show, Clint Hartswell, who was an old friend of mine who got me into Boards of Canada, I remember him saying that he was a big fan of theirs already before I was introduced to them. And he was saying, yeah, like Boards of Canada has this really interesting approach to how they do music and the way they incorporate melody, because they have these melodies, but what they do in the studio is they slightly detune everything, so everything has this. They might, have this real pretty, um, kind of joyous melody, but what they'll do is they'll take that melody and slightly tune it in a way that it's everything feels like it's slightly off, um, or it's going into a more psychedelic or a little bit more of a darker kind of tone. And I was like, wow, like that's pretty wild. Like that's a pretty cool concept on how to treat an established melody. And when you hear their music, they have that, like where it has this. Their music has a real interesting juxtaposition of emotions. Like a lot of their stuff, rhythmically very inspired by hip hop, and they have these real pretty melodies and kind of almost an optimistic, joyous sound. But then there's also this very, you know, dark kind of underbelly to their music as well, and and that's due to this process of how they take these melodies that they create and slightly give them this real off kilter feel by slightly detuning things, which is super unique. And you never really, I think other artists that do that, I think Aphex Twin does that melodically. I think he does that a lot on some of his tunes. But with what Boards of Canada does, it's so unique. And like I said in the beginning of the show, like I think they were really inventive in creating a style because you know you have this kind of sound that emerged in the late 90s to even now, where there's like this loungy trip hop kind of sound that a lot of groups have taken that sound and maybe made it more popular, where there's this hip hop kind of bass but also incorporates lots of ambience, and and it sometimes has this label of like, to a degree, like lounge music, but it has this bass, and I really feel that, like, and it's a particular style. I mean, I think groups that have that sound. Portishead is a group that's really done big things for that sound. Also, some Massive Attack is another group that has done a lot of things with that kind of trip hop, loungy kind of sound, where they incorporate melody and hip hop and things of that nature. And it's got this very kind of lo-fi vibe. It's kind of more chill inspired music. And I think Boards of Canada really created that sound in a lot of ways, really unique. And a lot of groups went on to replicate it, and not as good. Um, and a lot of that music that's come out after them, a lot of groups that were inspired by them, I don't feel like the songs are nowhere near as strong as what they have done. But they kind of created this loungy hip hop sound that was really unique and has gone on to become very popular. And and the other thing that's really fantastic about Boards of Canada is their consistency with the records that they've put out. They've put out so many great records, and over the years, there's always been a few that I've listened to probably the most. But so many great albums. Geo Daddy, which came out in 2002. Music Has the Right to Children, which came out in 90. It's crazy how long ago these records came out. 1998. These are all through Warp Records. Amazing album. This is one of my favorite albums. Super trippy, super psychedelic, groovy as hell, and a very relaxing album. But again, it has this real off kilter, slightly disturbing kind of quality to it, but also beautiful at the same time. One of my favorite Boards of Canada albums. Their last studio album, which I need to check out more, I heard a few tracks back when it came out and I thought it was okay, but I need to revisit it, and that is Tomorrow's Harvest. That was their last studio album, and that came out in 2013, which is crazy. They haven't put out anything, I don't believe, since then. But I heard a few of the tracks and I thought it was okay. And probably my favorite Boards of Canada album, which I can't recommend it enough, is the Campfire Head Phase, and that came out in 2005. An amazing album, absolutely amazing album. My two favorite albums of Boards of Canada is Music Has the Right to Children, again from 1998, and then the Campfire Head Chase in 2005. Just incredible albums. They really dialed in their style on these albums, and again, it's a real true definition of like a sonic journey. Another album of theirs, which I've been listening to again, which is a really great album, is it's a EP that they put out, Twasm, in '95, pretty old school. Another EP that they put out, which is really good, and A Beautiful Place Out in the country. Another really great album, and that came out in the early 2000. It came out 2000. It's crazy. Um, so many great records, and so many innovative sounds. One of my favorite electronic groups of all time. And again, it's one of those things I'm amazed by, so many people who don't know who they are. I think it's similar to, I mean, like I said, with Warp Records, Aphex Twin is probably the biggest name. Pretty much everybody knows who Aphex Twin is. Flying Lotus, I think, is also hugely popular. When it comes to Autechre, which is my favorite group, same kind of thing. I think maybe Autechre might be slightly more popular, but it's hard to say. But it's that same thing. It's pretty, and like Boards of Canada, it's still, I consider it underground music, and outside of the little niche of like people who like weirdos like me who love their music, it's a thing that people haven't really heard. It's, or I've been really, anytime in conversation when I've talked to people about electronic music, I talk about Warp Records. Most people don't know who they are, and I can't forget Square Pusher, another amazing artist, one of my all-time favorite artists. And I don't know if I have done a show about him, but I think I did. But if not, I got to. But many times in conversation with friends or people that I know that are into electronic music, I talk about Warp Records, and everybody across the board knows who Aphex Twin is, without a doubt. That's never a thing of like, oh, who's that? Or, he's got this big commercial appeal. Well, he doesn't have a commercial appeal, but he's just so well known. So, definitely the biggest. But when it comes to, and obviously Flying Lotus would be another one. Most people know who he is. He's very, very popular. And again, he's now a film director. I did a review on his film. I can't remember the name of it. It's not very good, but anyway, he's very, very popular. Thundercat's very, very popular as well. I believe his first album came out on Warp Records. I believe that's how I heard about him. And also, But when it comes to Autechre, I maybe two people have said that they know who they've heard of him or they were fans of him. In all my conversations about electronic music with people, and same thing with Boards of Canada. Maybe one person's heard of them, but barely anyone. And kind of the same thing with Square Pusher. Square Pusher has been all of these artists I'm talking about, especially Boards of Canada. I mean, these groups have been around for years, over 20 years, and they've been putting out just great record after great record. But I wanted to do a show on Boards of Canada because I think they're one of the most important electronic groups. So prolific. I think they're legendary, really innovative. They created this unique sound and style. So yeah, just super awesome. And please check them out if you get a chance. They're such an awesome, underrated group. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.